Ladies and gentlemen, Lenin, V. Lenin, you all know who Lenin is, don't you? Said this, quote, "Democracy is indispensable to socialism," end quote. Now, why is that, do you think? Well, it's simply this, ladies and gentlemen. They're calling the United States a democracy now. It is not, never has been. It is a constitutional republic. A constitutional republic is where there is a balance of power. In the federal government, that balance consists of the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. In the election process, where we elect our representatives to go and take care of business for the state in Washington, D.C., we elect representatives. Our founders set this government up so that senators were picked by the state, not elected by the people. This would make sure that our constitutional republic could not become a democracy and thus turn into an oppressive, dictatorial, socialist state. For they understood the process well. The first step into turning the United States into a democracy was taking the power of the state to choose its own senators away and put it in the hands of the electorate, or the people. Whenever the people see that they can vote themselves whatever exists in the treasury, socialism quickly follows. For when the people find out that they can vote themselves whatever they want, and that's what's happening in the country today, people are voting themselves whatever they want, Congress is voting themselves whatever they want, everybody is moving this country more and more into socialism. With socialism eventually comes a dictatorship. With a dictatorship always comes fascism in its various forms, or total and absolute control and ownership by the state of everybody and everything, and that is known as communism. Freedom disappears, ladies and gentlemen, when people become dependent upon the state, or upon a dictator, or upon a king, or a lord, or an emperor, or a baron, or a duke or duchess, for their very existence, for their job, for their clothing, for their food. When this happens, people, without even realizing it, have become enslaved. In the pursuit of laziness, and in the pursuit of the dole, getting something for nothing, which, folks, is a dream that never, never comes true. There is no such thing as something for nothing. When you accept a benefit from a benefactor, you give away some of your rights, for the benefactor has a right to dictate the manner in which you use the benefit. When you become a child to a father or a mother, the father and the mother have the right to dictate what time the child gets up, what the child has to eat, what kind of work the child does, if the child goes to school or if the child does not, what time the child has to be in bed, whether the child can go out, whether the child can drive a car, whether the child can have a bicycle, whether the child gets any gifts at Christmas time or any other time of the year for that matter. And when people become dependent upon the state, they become the child, and the state becomes the father. And you had better understand that. That is why Lenin understood, and our founding fathers understood, that democracy is indispensable to socialism. Did you ever wonder why the United Nations military is called peacekeepers? Because Karl Marx said this. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. I quote, "Peace is the absence of all opposition to socialism," end quote. Let me say that one more time. Karl Marx, quote, "Peace is the absence of all opposition to socialism," end quote. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Karl Marx was a bitter failure at absolutely everything that he ever tried? Have you ever really studied his life? Probably not. He was a bitter, absolute failure at every single thing he ever tried. Did you know that Karl Marx was a racist who hated Jews, blacks, and the common man, in particular Slavs? That's right, let me say it again. Karl Marx was a racist. He hated Jews, he hated blacks, and he hated the common man. Your Marxist professor in college didn't tell you that, did he? Did you know that Karl Marx was nothing more or less than a stooge for a wealthy capitalist named Friedrich Engels? Did you know that socialism was created by the rich as the ultimate method of enslaving and controlling the masses by making them totally and completely dependent upon the state? If not, ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you not to read college textbooks about socialism, but read the actual dialogues between Marx and Engels. You see, they were prolific writers. They wrote letters to each other and to other people their entire lives. Forget the textbooks. They're lying to you. Always, if you want to know the truth, go to the source. That's why I get so angry when somebody calls me to find out what their congressman is doing in Washington. Read the dialogues between Marx and Engels, and you will find it all laid out clearly for anyone to see. Even the sheeple will understand it. Of course, it's dry reading, and it takes a lot of time, and it's boring to wade through all of that crap, because that's what most of it is, absolute, total crap. But if you want to find the truth, you've got to do that. Those who have been teaching you the lie about socialism know that you won't, in most cases, ever even attempt it. Of course, before you start, I must tell you that you must have a brain and some rudimentary intelligence, something that most socialists apparently lack. For instance, let me take one little common big lie that the socialists have foisted upon the American people, and they have swallowed hook, line, and sinker. You see, the concept of right versus left. With the socialist given that the left extreme is communism, which is good somehow, left, liberal, communism, socialism is good, and the right extreme is Nazi, bad. This has happened through repeated connection of Nazi with right, and not any basis in fact whatsoever. It is a deception of the greatest magnitude, for Nazi is not right, never was right, and can never be right, pun absolutely intended. You see, ladies and gentlemen, any scale must measure two extremes, or it's not a scale. In effect, heavy versus light, white versus black, light versus darkness, fat versus thin, and etc. You see, the concept that a scale measuring left versus right has at its two extremes elements of total control and oppression is absolutely ludicrous, and is one of the biggest lies that has ever been foisted upon this world. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, The truth is that the scale measures at the extreme left the total control and ownership of everything and everyone by the state. This is called communism. Versus, at the right extreme, the absence of any control of anything or anyone by anybody, which is called anarchy. Between these two extremes are all the other forms of government and or control or absence of control. Somewhere near the middle is our constitutional republic. Didn't you ever wonder, ladies and gentlemen, how the socialist big lie made anarchists absolutely disappear from the equation? On the left was total control of communism. On the right was the total control of fascism under Nazis. What was anarchy supposed to be in the middle? Where our constitutional republic actually sits? Didn't you ever wonder about that? Or do you ever wonder about anything anymore? Have you been so conditioned, so brainwashed, that you just accept whatever comes across the big eye, the propaganda machine of Big Brother in your living room? You see, Nazi could never be on the right. If on the left is socialism and communism, Nazi cannot, absolutely cannot, could never be on the right. For Nazi is simply gutter slang, ladies and gentlemen, for National Socialism. Nazi originated from the German National Socialist Workers' Party. You see, Hitler was a socialist. Hitler nationalized almost everything. He had social programs for everyone and every circumstance. Hitler was engaged in a program of social engineering never before attempted by anyone or any government in the history of the world. Hitler repeatedly made reference to a, quote, new order, end quote, and a, quote, new order of the world, end quote. You see, folks, the so-called New Age movement is nothing new. It actually originated in Nazi Germany, and most of what is extant now as New Age was, in fact, in vogue then. Communism is also a manifestation of socialism. Nazis can only exist on the left just above communism, which, by the way, exhibits more facets of fascism than the Nazis ever did. Murdered more people than the Nazis ever did. But that does not excuse what the Nazis did, don't get me wrong. What I am trying to do is show you the truth and expose the big lie under which you have been living for so many years. For all of these lies, taken together, are forcing you down on your knees, are propelling you over the cliff toward a death in a world of socialism where you will be enslaved in a cashless system of debt, chained to a computer forever, where ownership of private property is forbidden, and where the school in the community will be merged with the mental health center, and you will be required to attend from birth to grave. Another socialist lie is that fascism is an expression of the right. However, ladies and gentlemen, when one studies history, it is found to have only existed in socialist regimes. Fascism is an expression of control which only exists on the left, because on the left side of the scale is where control lives. It only exists in that place. Although communists and socialists will vehemently deny it, fascism only reaches its full potential in a communist system of government where literally everything is owned and controlled by the state. And the only thing that matters is the welfare of the state. The God is the state, the Father is the state, the provider is the state, and the executioner is the state. If you don't believe it, get out your dictionary. The Webster's Encyclopedic Unabridged Dictionary of the English Language defines fascism as, and I quote verbatim, one period, sometimes capitalized, a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often, but not always, racism. The communists were nationalistic. Go back and read the rhetoric of the Soviet Union. Read the rhetoric of Cuba. Read the rhetoric of every socialist and communist nation that has ever existed. And you will quickly discover that you are wrong. You say a world government cannot be nationalist? Yes, it can, ladies and gentlemen, and it will. And it is already beginning to show the signs of that. For if you are not in the politically correct frame of mind, where you speak of the world and the world community and the brotherhood of nations as the number one priority, what happens to you? The Soviet Union perfected a system called psychopolitics. We did some broadcasts on that. We talked about psychopolitics. Nobody ever heard of it until Lavrenti Beria, who was the head of the secret police in Russia, the NKVD as it was called then, and it was the whole Soviet Union. Beria was probably one of the most feared men on the face of this earth, and is probably responsible for more murders than probably any other man or woman who have ever lived in the history of the world. Unbelievably evil man. Well, he talked about psychopolitics during a speech that he made at Lenin University in Moscow, somewhere around 1948, 49. And none of the rest of the world had ever heard of it. What the whole gist of it was to turn everything upside down. Make things that had traditionally been accepted in our culture and in our society as the very best things seem to be the very worst. To use our own laws and our own constitution and our own courts against us, which has certainly been done quite a bit, through interpretation and twisting of the meaning, through the changing of the meaning of words, through the demonization, and then as one gets in a position where they can hire others below them, they do so. When they get on a commission or a panel that's responsible for choosing people to do things, they make sure that socialists are chosen.
And over a long period of time, what happens is they take over a country, and they change the meaning of words, and they change what is accepted and what is not. They demonize that which is detrimental to their cause, and they boost up and elevate that which helps their cause. They destroy morals and ethics. They destroy the minds of the young. They destroy the education system. They take over publishing and entertainment industries and begin a full-scale assault upon the population using psychopolitics.